Hip is a thing where we test your clinical skills in orthopedics. So, your knowledge of hip is not knowledge, but knowledge and skills. Whenever you approach a problem at any site, in this case hip, you must be armed with a comprehensive checklist of data collection about the patient. That checklist is usually divided into identification and demographic data, into history taking, the present, the past, the personal, the socio-economic history, the rehabilitation potential, the resilience. All those are components of excellent history taking, and all those components are there in HIP data collection. Then you examine the patient, the general examination, the systemic examination, the examination which is special, which pertains to hip, where the hip disease presents wherever. For example, lot of dandruff may suggest psoriatic arthritis, anemia, mental status, jaundice, reddening of eye in Reiter syndrome, salivary involvement in Sjogren syndrome, mouth ulcers, lymphadenopathy in Felty's syndrome and Still's disease. As we go down, the nodules in the lung in Kaplan syndrome, all would have simultaneous hip involvement. Then the sauce abscess in abdomen, any reason of ileus or spasm may present as hip deformity. The spine may be co-involved with hip, may cause a hip problem, may look like a hip problem. The spinal cord, the costovertebral joints, which may be involved in ankylosing spondylitis, which may also involve the hip. The prostate may give secondaries to the hip. The perrectal and the pervaginal examination may show you the inward migration of the medial wall of pelvis, as in protrusio as acetabuli or in central fracture dislocation. Then you have to examine the sacroiliac joints, the spine in the sacroiliac joints, the opposite hip, the opposite knee, the opposite foot and ankle, the same side foot and ankle, the same side knee before you start concentrating on the hip. So, this is the red tag effect of hip examination. That means if you show the bull the red, it will go towards the red and not attack the attacker. All these things must be done as a checklist. Before the aircraft uh, takes off, you have a checklist. So these are parts of checklist. Then finally, you come to the local examination of the hip. The local examination consists of inspection, palpation, measurement, movements, and deformity. The inspection has certain prerequisites, and those prerequisites are that there must be good light, hard bed, comfortable patient with privacy protected, and uh, a examiner that he can believe in, the clinician or the doctor that he can believe in, that he has faith in, who's smiling, who's comforting. So these are the prerequisites of hip examination, and the final prerequisite is a very good exposure, right from the nipple line to the toes, and with a T bandage which shows both iliac crest and ASIS. So with this precaution, if you examine the hip, I mean that is what the examiner examines all these points in the checklist. Then in the inspection, you begin with the xiphisternum, the position of umbilicus, the anterosophiliac spine. In the back, you see the posterior spine. Then the swelling, scar, and sinus around hip. Then wasting of the quadriceps, the direction of the patella. With the direction of the patella, you know about the rotation attitude of the hip. You also talk about the flexion extension attitude and adduction abduction attitude. Then you go to the malleolus levels, check the length, and then you test about active dorsiflexion, because you know that can get involved in trochanteric fractures where you have given above knee fixed skin traction, which has pressed the lateral popliteal nerve near the uh, neck of fibula. So active dorsiflexion, straight leg raising, all these things are tested in inspection. You see, I've just given you a checklist, and I remember it because I use the checklist always. Then you go towards the palpation, where you confirm the findings of inspection and test temperature, tenderness, transmitted movements, telescopy, and vascular sign of Narath. Temperature, tenderness, transmitted movements, telescopy, trochanter, and vascular sign of Narath. The trochanter, you test the level, the thickness, the prominence or the residence, and the tenderness. The tenderness of trochanter indicates trochanteric fracture or disease, and the tenderness in the Scarpa's triangle indicates fracture neck of femur. So these are all T's, the 5 T's: the temperature, tenderness, transmitted movements, telescopy, trochanter, and 1 V, the vascular sign of Narath. After the palpation, you go towards the measurement. You test true length from xiphisternum to tip of medial malleolus with both limbs. This is apparent length, with both limbs parallel to each other and parallel to the trunk. Apparent length would change because of tilt of the pelvis, and the pelvis will tilt because there is a scoliosis. Then the tilt will not be correctable. Because there is an adduction or an abduction deformity, which means that if there is an abduction deformity beyond a certain position in the range of abduction, the hip will not adduct and the limb will stay out. To bring it to the ground, the spine will tilt, the ASIS will become lower, and the limb will become again parallel to the trunk, because parallel to the trunk is important for walking. The third reason of a pelvic tilt can be a true shortening. So if there is a true shortening, just to bring the foot to the ground, the pelvis may tilt again. You have to distinguish, if there is an apparent change in length, you have to distinguish these reasons of the pelvic tilt and report them. So, a lower ASIS I have explained, the pelvic tilt I have explained. And this changes apparent length, apparent shortening or apparent lengthening. From xiphisternum to tip of medial malleolus with both limbs parallel to each other and parallel to the trunk. I mean, that you have to remember. Then you move on to the true length. The true length is tested with both hips in identical position and from xiphisternum to the medial malleolus. If one of the limb is shorter, you try to find out whether it is shorter in the below the knee or above the knee. You do it by measuring the true length from xiphisternum to the adductor tubercle, or you bend the flex both hips, and if the level of the knee is lower, then the thigh is shortened. If the level of the heel is higher, then the leg is shortened. Then, after seeing that the thigh is shortened, you try to find out whether the trochanter is raised or not. You do it by a Nelaton's line, a shoemaker's line, a Cheney's parallelogram, and the Bryant's triangle. The Nelaton's line is a line which joins the ischial tuberosity to the anterosophilic spine, and the trochanter tip must normally be at this line. If it is higher, it means that the trochanter is raised. This is the only reliable test if there is a bilateral raising of the trochanter. The shoemaker's line is that from the tip of the trochanter, you join the ASIS. Normally, it should cross at or above the level of the umbilicus. If it is crossing below the level, it means the trochanter is raised. The third is that you join both the tip of both trochanters and the both ASIS. Normally, the two lines should be parallel. This is called the Cheney's parallelogram. And the fourth is a Bryant's triangle. Now you remember the definition of it. See the precision of the description of the Bryant's triangle. A Bryant's triangle is a right angle triangle with hypotenuse as the line joining the anterosophilic spine to the tip of the trochanter. Now, if the base of the Bryant triangle with the patient lying down is shortened as compared to the opposite side, the Bryant's triangle shows that their trochanter is raised. So these are the four signs which say that the true shortening is above the trochanter. After shortening, you do some certain special tests, especially in children, and they are that you hold the hip and the knee flexed with the child lying, and you bring the knees together, which means adduct internally rotate, and you find that the head may pop out in congenital dislocation of the hip. This test is called as Barlow, Bahar-Low. The head goes out. The second is reverse of this. You take the knees out into abduction external rotation and you find that the head goes inside. So this is the Ottolani and the Barlow test, and then you do a per rectal and a per vaginal examination to show whether the head has centrally dislocated or not. The other way of showing that the head is centrally dislocated is that you place registers on both the trochanters and you see the distance of the pubic symphysis to the surface of the trochanters. This is called as Morris's bitrochanteric test, and by this you can see whether the trochanter has moved inside or not. Now, on each of these physical signs, you can be asked to explain why this has occurred, and you must have a 3D concept as to why it has occurred. And then, after you have remembered this checklist, you have practiced this checklist on patients, and you can elicit all physical signs validly, precisely, and correctly, then uh, you are a good clinician and you can sort of at least have a good clinical data collection. Then you interpret these physical signs to make a diagnosis. For example, if there is a flexion, adduction, external rotation deformity, what I have forgotten is the movements. Hip is a triaxial joint. A triaxial joint would move on a antero-posterior axis, which will be abduction, adduction. A side-to-side axis, which will be flexion, extension. and a supero-inferior axis which will be internal rotation or external rotation. Now, if the movement is restricted, this is called as ankylosis. It can be actively restricted or it can be passively restricted. In the lower limb, we usually mean it is passively restricted. So, if the movement is restricted, let us see the grades of restriction. If abduction is restricted, that is the grade 1. Then abduction is absent, that means it's not going beyond neutral, that is grade 2. And if in the range of adduction, the hip is in a position beyond which abduction is not possible, it becomes adduction deformity. So the same pathology would cause restriction of abduction, absence of abduction, and adduction deformity. What is a deformity? Deformity is a position of the hip in the range of adduction beyond which abduction is not possible. So if you simultaneously say in your examination what is that there is an adduction deformity and there is a 5 degrees of abduction, you are stumped and clean bowled. So you don't never say that. If there is a flexion deformity, there should be no extension. So this is one thing about movement. Then why should movement be restricted? Abduction will be restricted, absent, or there will be an adduction deformity if the adductors are in spasm or are contracted. So this is called as extra-articular ankylosis. Secondly, abduction can be restricted if the cartilage is rubbing against each other and there is pain and there is spasm, and since the most powerful muscle which produces spasm is the iliopsoas, that's why the adduction may be restricted because it has pulled the hip in adduction. The third thing is that there can be fibrous connection between the two articular surfaces in the position of adduction. And therefore, not only is the adduction restricted, any attempt to move is painful. This is fibrous ankylosis. And finally, this fibrous ankylosis may convert to bony ankylosis, and therefore the adduction, the hip will be in the position of adduction. There will be no movement possible in any of the ranges, and but the attempt to move will become painless. So this becomes bony ankylosis. So this is about movement general. Then you have to sit down and interpret these physical signs. For example, you see all these physical findings will basically fall into 4 categories. First is flexion, adduction, external rotation. The second is flexion, adduction, internal rotation. The third is flexion, abduction, external rotation. And the fourth is none of this. So now flexion, adduction, external rotation is the commonest cause is fracture neck, femur or trochanteric fracture. If there is no history of injury and it's a child, it is Perthes disease. And if there is no history of injury and it's an adolescent, then it is slipped femoral epiphysis. So this is the thinking about flexion, adduction, external rotation. Now, if there is a flexion, adduction, internal rotation deformity, it's because of the iliopsoas spasm. And if it is because of the iliopsoas spasm, then the cause of the iliopsoas spasm can be extra-articular, that means inflamed thing in the right iliac fossa which is producing iliopsoas spasm, or the cause can be within the hip, like intra-articular involvement in TB stage 2. You can distinguish both because in the extra-articular cause, rotational movements will be painless. In the extra-articular cause, the rotational movements would become painful. Then you have to move to that this deformity is now associated, flexion, adduction, internal rotation is now associated with true shortening. In that circumstance, the diagnosis becomes a posterior dislocation of hip, which can be congenital, traumatic, pathological, or paralytic. The pathological posterior dislocation of hip would occur because of tuberculosis, stage 3, or it will occur because of, say, septic arthritis. So, congenital, traumatic, pathological, or paralytic posterior dislocation of hip. Then, so flexion, adduction, internal rotation with or without true shortening. The third is flexion, abduction, external rotation. This is a position taken in the hip when there is a lot of fluid, because that's the maximum capacity of a joint. So this can be tuberculosis, stage 1. It can be septic arthritis. It can be, if it is polyarticular, it can be ankylosing spondylitis. And it can be transient synovitis, which can later on produce Perthes disease. The second flexion, abduction, external rotation combination with true lengthening is anterior dislocation of the hip. The central fracture dislocation of hip is the joker of traumatic conditions, and osteoarthritis and avascular necrosis is the joker of non-traumatic conditions. They can acquire any deformity. The central dislocation of the hip has two special tests to it: rectal and pervaginal examination and Morris's bitrochanteric test. So I have said this smoothly, without looking at any book, and you should be able to say it smoothly first. Then you should say, then after you have made a clinical diagnosis, then it becomes a short case. What is your diagnosis? Why do you say so? How would you investigate? So I will give you a formula of investigation also. You can say, to assess the general condition of patient: hemoglobin, TLC, DLC, ESR, GBP, BTCT, blood urea, blood sugar, urine and stool. You see, I have mucked them up, but till I say them, I remember what to say next. Then you can say that to find out what is the structural problem, I can do a imaging, which can be an X-ray hip, X-ray pelvis with both hips AP, both hips in identical position, then lateral view. Then I can say I can do a CT scan, a MRI. All these are imaging, or an ultrasound even. Then I can do certain biochemical tests like urinary hydroxyprotein, blood urea, blood sugar, all that biochemistry. But specific biochemistry which would diagnose certain specific conditions of the hip depending on the clinical diagnosis. Then I can say I can do microbiology, and then I can say I can do aspiration cytology, a biopsy, a core biopsy, confirm the diagnosis. So that is how you approach the investigations around hip. Then you approach the treatment. And in the treatment, you must list all possible treatments. And you must be able to discuss the do's and don'ts of each of them. One of the most important do's is doable. Can you do it in your infrastructure? And then the second most important way to choose a treatment is that it must adapt to the lifestyle, the ADL of the patient and the pocket of the patient. So cost, effectivity, risks, and a very rational treatment which adapts to the surroundings of the patient, gives him functionality in his activities of daily living, in his home, in his recreation, in his vocation, and in his socialization. So if you are rational in choosing the treatment, you get very, very high marks because you look to be a good human being. Then, uh, after the treatment, you have to judge prognosis. So you are in a habit of saying good prognosis, bad prognosis. That will not do. You have to state the prognosis from the most, uh, because of the disease, because of the drug, because of your treatment, because of a complication, and how disabling or deadly is the complication, and what is the probability that it will occur. So prognosis is a science. It is not good bad that way. So after you judge prognosis, then you always have to keep smiling at the examiner and not look nervous. And you should not actually be nervous. You should approach things in small bits and concentrate on what you are doing. You see, you should not start thinking that I'll fail, I'll fail, I'll fail. Because if you do that, you had it anyway. So this, in short, is the hip, okay, and we will approach it uh, in teaching YouTubes we have, and then there will be a very comprehensive test which tests your ability to actually do these things properly. Okay, so you have to. I'm calling that test the hip bomb, and you have to be prepared for it.